White House today warned Congress not to hold the vote on the debt ceiling hostage. Press Secretary Jay Carney had this to say.
A game of chicken with our economy is a hugely risky affair that will not just be a game of who wins and who loses in the political sweepstakes here in Washington, but will have a catastrophic and direct impact on economies around the world and on Americans here.
A game of chicken, he calls it. Meanwhile, House Speaker John Boehner says his party, the Republicans, will not vote to raise the limit unless serious changes are made. Earlier today, he called on the president to demonstrate leadership. Are we headed for another budget battle over this time over the debt ceiling? Arizona Republican Representative Jeff Flake, a fiscal hawk, a fiscal conservative, joins me from Capitol Hill. Representative Flake, it's a pleasure. Welcome to the Glenn Beck program. How do you see this playing out? Do you see the deal that was cut by the president and Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Reid as being adopted on this Friday, and then the battleground becoming the debt ceiling? Or do you think that enough small government, fiscally conservative Republicans will say $38 billion, that's nothing. We borrowed $100 billion during the time we were debating over the $38 billion, and not enough of them will even vote for that?
Well, I can tell you, as you mentioned, more was borrowed during the time it took to negotiate the package than we actually saved. And so we've got to use the debt limit increase as leverage to actually put a cap on spending. Spending cuts are fine, but we can see that the White House is unwilling to agree to many of those or to significant cuts at all. So what we need are enforceable spending caps. So when Congress fails to hit the spending reduction targets, there are automatic rescissions that take place across the board. And so that's what we've got to have, and a number of us will not vote for the debt limit increase unless those are attached.
Congressman Flake, do you trust the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury to abide by these caps? Wouldn't it only be the power of the law that says you cannot borrow more than $14.3 trillion that would force them to run the government just with the money they collect from taxes and other revenue?
Well, the beauty of our system, Article 1 gives power of the purse, so the president can't spend any money that we don't give him. It's difficult right now because the Democrats control the Senate, and they don't seem much more inclined to cut spending than the president does. But if Congress doesn't give the president the money, he can't spend it. And if we have our own rules which prohibit us from actually spending that money, automatic rescissions that take place, that's the way to solve the problem.
Do you accept the argument of your colleague in the Senate, Pat Toomey, who was an economist before he became the senator from Pennsylvania, that the government does collect enough in revenue and taxes to pay the debt service and to run the government at the same time? Or do you accept this doomsday argument that we just heard from Jay Carney, the president's press secretary, that if you don't let the president borrow more money, we're going to default on our debt, and that will cause all kinds of Armageddon in the economic communities?
Well, I think all of us recognize when you run up bills, you've got to pay them. And the debt limit increase is basically paying off the bills that we've already accrued. So I'm not disputing the fact that we need to raise the debt limit, but what I'm saying, it would be very irresponsible of Congress to, when you pay off those debts, just allow it to continue and go and go and go and do this again and again and again. The president, remember, the budget that he presented would double the national debt in just a few years. And so we can't go that direction. If we're going to raise the debt limit, then attach enforceable spending caps to it, and that's what we've got to do.
If the president doesn't attach enforceable spending caps, if the Congress doesn't enact a balanced budget resolution, will Congressman Jeff Flake of the state of Arizona vote against raising the debt ceiling?
I can tell you, unless we have enforceable spending caps, and that'll be the Congress that does that, not the president. Unless the Congress enacts enforceable spending caps, then it won't get my vote.
You see, here's the difficulty with that, and we have less than a minute. I could see the House doing that, but I can't see the Senate doing that because it's controlled by the Democrats. They, as you pointed out, want to spend. The only thing the House can do on its own is say no to more borrowing, and without an affirmative vote from the House, that legislation wouldn't even make its way to the Senate.
Well, I think the nice thing is people across the country recognize that we can't go on like this, and so I think that they'll insist, along with the House, that we have enforceable spending caps. So that's I think, the strength of our position is people across the country agree with us. They recognize we can't go on like this, and so I think we're in a strong position here in the House.
Congressman Jeff Flake, maybe in a year and a half, Senator Jeff Flake, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.